societal context that like might not necessarily apply to all different societies contexts of gender, right? Like you can have different constructions of gender that are not based on sex or are not based on sexual characteristics. You can have concepts of gender that are based on what people actually do within society. It can be more of a societal role that someone actively takes on. And I think that we can talk about maybe how there are different ways that can be gender might be implemented in society that could be better. But like yeah, like a lot of this like definitional semantic talk, I don't think it's actually all that useful.
It is entirely useful because gender only exists in the realm of language. It is discursively constructed. You actually like it is. Unfortunately, there is no way around it. And the exact thing you're talking about, language is the answer to that. So like the postmodern conceptions of gender and the push to push gender as something that is performative is the answer to the fact that gender is not universal and has lots of different meanings. So I only react to that because people constantly say, oh, it's semantics. And it's literally my whole life. And it actually is the answer to like a lot of things.
And I don't mean to belittle it by calling it a semantic issue. What I mean is like, we could be having a completely different conversation about this if we were talking about it in a different language with a different like societal context behind it and a history behind it.
So I have to challenge this because I hear this a lot, but I feel like it's not really true. I feel like if we were to go across the vast majority of societies on the planet, there's going to be like some like if we show like a woman and a man wearing somewhat traditional, it can be Eastern garb, it can be Western garb, it can be whatever, based on both like gender expression, so the things they're wearing, the way they carry themselves, and like the actual like secondary sexual characters in the structure of the body. I feel like most people will have a pretty coherent definition of like, whoa, well, like this is or at least an understanding of like, oh, that's a woman, that's a man. I feel like you run into a lot of problems when we start off with this, like, what I think a really radical take, the idea that like, oh, well, everybody's got a totally different understanding of what male and female is, when that doesn't really seem to track to reality at all.
I'm just gonna
male and female is different.
Put this idea out there that like when you say like, oh, people would have a pretty good idea, yeah, within that context, but like if you showed somebody like a male or female and they're or how they're traditionally dressed in one society and you showed that to somebody from another society, they might not be able to recognize. It is contextual.
Sure, but while that's possible, so this is what I'm really curious about. So let's say that you show, do you know Sneaky?
No idea.
Okay, so Sneaky was a player on C9 who does, I don't think Sneaky's trans. I think Sneaky for a while just
Sneaky's not trans.
No, Sneaky's not trans. No.
Just cross-dressing, right? For their cosplay stuff? Yeah.
Yes.
So that's somebody where if you were to show somebody a picture of that, they would immediately go like, oh, okay, that's a woman 100%. They would assume it immediately. But if you were to disrobe Sneaky, this is a little weird to talk about something else, but like if you were to start showing them like pictures of them naked, well, now their identifier would change. They would be like, oh, wait, well, hold on. That's not a woman.
So if you're talking about showing somebody naked.
Yeah. So what I'm asking here is like, if that definition or understanding is changing once they're like getting more information about the person, what process is going on there if a person is not appealing to some underlying understanding of like the content of male or female? Like what? I mean,
you're doing it right now, though. You're like literally you're conflating sex and gender in this conversation.
Holy shit! Wait, I think my Discord is bugging out because the voice is like bugging. You sound really similar to Demon Mom right now.
Well, so wait, to kind of answer.
Wait, could I jump in on this when there's a free moment?
I'll make my point real quick, and then I need to use the bathroom, so that would be perfect.
Yeah, go for it. I'm curious what you think is happening there.
Yeah, no, I think that one of the things is that the more information you have on a certain individual, the more accurately you might be able to gender them. Like, I don't think that's really controversial, right?
But when you say accuracy and gendering, you're implying that there is a truthful, like, underlying fact of the matter of what the gender is, because you're getting more accurate. This is what the implication is.
So it also depends on whether you're talking about sex or gender, and that's kind of what we started talking about in the first place, because
we're talking traditional, it can be Eastern garb, it can be Western garb, it can be whatever, based on both like gender expression, so the things they're wearing, the way they carry themselves, and like the actual like secondary sexual characters in the structure of the body. I feel like most people will have a pretty coherent definition of like, whoa, well, like this is or at least an understanding of like, oh, that's a woman, that's a man. I feel like you run into a lot of problems when we start off with this, like, I think a really radical take, the idea that like, oh, well, everybody's got a totally different understanding of what male and female is, when that doesn't really seem to
Well,
track to
so
reality at all.
I'm just gonna
Well, male and
kind
female
of
is different.
put this idea out there that like when you say like, oh, people would have a pretty good idea, yeah, within that context, but like if you showed somebody like a male or female and they're or how they're traditionally dressed in one society and you showed that to somebody from another society, they might not be able to recognize. It is contextual.
Sure, but while that's possible, so this is what I'm really curious about. So let's say that you show, do you know Sneaky?
No idea.
Okay, so Sneaky was a player on C9 who does, I don't think Sneaky's trans. I think Sneaky for a while just
Sneaky's
did,
not trans.
No, Sneaky's not trans. No.
just cross-dressing, right? For their cosplay stuff? Yeah.
Yes.
So that's somebody where if you were to show somebody a picture of that, they would immediately go like, oh, okay, that's a woman 100%. They would assume it immediately. But if you were to disrobe Sneaky, this is a little weird to talk about something else, but like if you were to start showing them like pictures of them naked, well, now their identifier would change. They would be like, oh, wait, well, hold on. That's not a woman.
So if you're talking about showing somebody naked.
Yeah. So what I'm asking here is
Okay.
like, if that definition or understanding is changing once they're like getting more information about the person, what process is going on there if a person is not appealing to some underlying understanding of like the content of male or female? Like what,
I mean,
what is
you're
happening
doing it
there?
right now, though. You're like literally, you're conflating sex and gender in this conversation.
Holy shit! Wait, I think my Discord is bugging out because the voice is like bugging. You sound really similar to Demon Mom right now.
Well, so
Wait,
to kind of answer.
wait. Could I jump in on this when there's a free moment?
I'll make my point real quick, and then I need to use the bathroom, so that would be perfect.
Yeah, go for it. I'm curious what you think is happening there.
Yeah, no, I think that one of the things is that the more information you have on a certain individual, the more accurately you might be able to gender them. Like, I don't think that's really controversial, right?
But
Like,
when you say accuracy in gendering, you're implying that there is a truthful, like, underlying fact of the matter of what the gender is, because you're getting more accurate. This is what the implication is.
So it also depends on whether you're talking about sex or gender, and that's kind of what we started talking about in the first place. Because
let's say we're talking sex here.
Okay, so if we're talking about sex, well, then you'd have to break down, like, well, okay, what are their genitals? Okay, well, their genitals seem to be male. Okay, but what about their DNA? We don't know what their DNA is just by looking at them. So, oh, okay, we'll give them a blood test. We'll see what their DNA is. Oh, okay, well, their DNA is XX, but they have some sort of hormonal condition. Let's check out their hormones. Okay, but so like, you start breaking it down into like all these different levels where like the more information you have on somebody, the less like it actually makes sense to be like putting them into a male or female category in a lot of cases, you know.
Okay, I won't argue. Who wants to go?
All right, bathroom
Vaush, I
time.
think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead,
Okay. I feel like we split hairs on this. Also, hey, my name's Vaush. I'm cisgender. I apologize for my existence. Okay. So earlier somebody, I don't know anyone's names except for you, Destiny Demon Mom, but earlier it was said that the more you know about a person, you can generally accurately guess a person's gender. So the reason for that is because most people are cisgender. While there's not an inherent correlation or causative element between sex and gender, you can generally make some inferences based on people's appearances, which will point you towards their sex, and that will usually overlap with a person's gender, assigned gender at birth, you know. So that's generally what people do when they make guesses. Most people, maybe even everybody, does some amount of assuming gender in their day-to-day life, because most people are cis, and because there are a lot of normative and social elements that go along with our understanding of people's genders that influence how we treat them even from the get-go, before we can even ask a person's pronouns or whatever. When we talk about what the definition of gender is, I feel like there are two, it seems like they conflict, but they really don't, ideas in the minds of most progressive people, whether they're trans or cis or whatever. And that's usually thus: gender matters to me, but gender doesn't really matter. And while I think those two things seem sort of initially contradictory, they make sense when you unpack whatever that meaning is. It's usually, when I think of gender meaning something to me, it's a matter of my relationship to myself, my self-identity, and more, maybe even more practically, when I tell other people what my gender is, when I tell them what my pronouns are, I'm telling them what block of behavior I want them to regard me with, how they should refer to me, how they should treat me. There's a set of social roles and expectations associated with one gender that I would rather be treated by than another. That obviously makes a pretty huge deal to trans people, which is why we try not to misgender them and what have you. But just because there's some personal utility to be derived from the distinction between whatever roles you'd get from one group of gendered norms to another doesn't mean there's anything inherent about the process. There's a quote from a person, that's as far as I'm going to get remembering this, saying sometimes the best thing that you can do to a question is to dissolve it rather than to resolve it. I feel like gender might be one of those. I don't know.
Yep, Wittgenstein. I said it's always, this conversation always comes back to Wittgenstein, doesn't it?
Well, sure, because at the end of the day, every term refers to the collective understanding of it. I mean, you were talking about this earlier. What is a chair, right? Well, a chair is, how can you define a chair in a way that encompasses all chairs, but nothing that isn't a chair? It's impossible. You know, you're always relying on what people think something is. And if gender's that way, sure. But we make the prescriptive argument because a lot of people do have understandings of gender which clash with understandings other people hold. The if you identify as a woman, you are one narrative is increasingly popular in America. As far as I can tell, it's probably within the next 50 years going to be, if not the, then a dominant understanding of what gender means. And at that point, do all of the trans women suddenly then become women, where that narrative becomes dominant? No, we make the prescriptive argument here. We can derive more social utility from making gender as arbitrary as something to be defined by social self-identification, which I think would be better for most people, because any other definition falls flat. You go biological, you hurt a lot of people, you know? You go presentative, like the Judith Butler performative gender argument. Well, is closeted trans person trans then?
Just because it's not presentative. It's not about presentation. Performance doesn't mean theatrical performance. It means performing tasks. It means performing a series of tasks which are associated with a gender that have they copy something, they imitate something that never really existed. Performance is the same as performing an operation. And actually, there would be a great detriment to every woman who uses the category of woman within the judicial system to fight for their rights. To make gender this arbitrary nothing category, it would have a huge detriment. And trans women already are women. We don't need to abolish women in order for trans women to be women. Trans women are already women.
Why are
wait, hold on. I wasn't making that argument at all. I wasn't saying you have to abolish womanhood.
You said it should be so, gender should be so arbitrary, it has no meaning other than social identification.
Well, I mean, I'm a gender abolitionist. It's a position that I imagine a number of other progressive people hold, that ultimately gender is a destructive category, that it doesn't actually serve us much benefit. There
so
are
what
other
is
ways
the gender you're abolishing though, Vaush? Like, I honestly, I really agree with you, but this is like literally my whole thing. And I just want to know, like, when you say that you're abolishing gender, what is it that you are abolishing? What is the strict definition, given that all gender theorists haven't come up with a clear understanding of what gender is? So what is the understanding you have of what you are abolishing?
Joe,
well, the broader understanding of gender abolitionism was that you wouldn't assign any social roles, tasks, or obligations or expectations to a person based on their birth sex, because that's functionally what gender does to people. You know, you relate to your gender in different ways as you grow up, but most people's relationships to their gender is mostly doctor says XXXY at birth. You know, what set of clothes are you wearing? How are we going to treat you? What school are you going to go to, et cetera, et cetera. An ideal gender abolished world would be one where that doesn't happen, right? You know, you pop out a kid and it's like, hey, they can do whatever they want. But if they want to go by other social identifiers as they grow older, that's great, as long as it's a conscious and, you know, free choice that isn't coercive, as our current system definitely is.
And Joe, that's my question to you, is like, so there are things that get ascribed to you because you are presumed to be a woman, and there are things that, and I'm going to say something controversial, I pass most of the time, and most of the time people think that I am also just a woman. They don't think I'm a trans woman. They don't ascribe that to me most of the time. So I get ascribed the things that society ascribes to women, and I get the negative stereotypes that society ascribes to women. And when I talk about gender abolitionism, I'm talking about that concept of, I don't want to be ascribed things societally just because I pass as a woman, just because I take hormones, just because whatever. I want to be able to not have those things happen. I don't want them to happen to other women. I don't want them to happen to men. That's what I talk about when I talk about gender abolition.
And the future genders will be, are you a gamer or a weeb, you know?
Yeah.
Social categories that you fit into because of personal choices that you've made, rather than...
Can I ask for trans people on this panel? Is there anybody here that...
Before you do that, I want Joe to be able to respond. Then we can ask a question, please. Joe.
I don't really have a response other than, of course, I don't want gender roles and gender stereotypes and gender oppression to continue. I think the concept of gender is essential to ensuring that happens so long as the judicial system remains, where we need that categorization in order to gain representation. So, of course, I don't want oppression based on gender, but I think that maybe I'm just misunderstanding because I'm looking at very specific ideas of gender abolition. But I think that I take real issue as well with the idea that gender is something that is construed based on shared trauma or shared oppression. I really don't like that definition of womanhood at all. So I would agree, yes, we shouldn't have some sort of gender oppression, but I'm not sure. Sometimes people put the abolition. Actually, let me think on it. Let me think about it.
Okay.
I just want to say the abolition thing. This is like a 500 years from now, maybe we reshuffle social priorities type of thing. In reality,
Yeah,
I mean,
no,
I claim I'm a gender abolitionist, but I care about being a guy, you know? We have our preferences, we're going to live with them, and as long as we have them, they should be respected. But in the long term, we should probably care a little less about this stuff. Not telling individuals to, but placing less social weight on it. We already do this. I mean, it used to be men and women, what we understood them to be, dressed and acted completely differently. I mean, 1950s America, you know, I mean, a wall between the two. And nowadays, there's a lot more, you know, ambiguity when it comes to expected performance on whether or not you're a man or a woman, self-identified or otherwise. So that's good. I mean, we probably should tear down those walls, no?
Let's go to Destiny. You got a question you want to ask?
Yeah, what do we think about trans people that claim that they experience gender euphoria? So my question is like, so for people that say that like we should abolish all the expectations or all the roles that go along with gender, for certain trans people that say that they have an experience of gender euphoria, so when they feel like they're treated in such a way societally that coincides with their gender identity, do like how do we?
I think this comes down to what I consider to be like a really, really shallow understanding of gender. The argument earlier was about like is gender I don't know. Is the I identify as a woman, therefore I am a woman? Is that a tautology kind of thing, right? And I think we're kind of looking at gender in a very sort of simplistic kind of surface level way that's like very sociological. Whereas I do think there are like inherent parts to gender. I think gender is like a self schema. So like a framework we use to sort of categorize ourselves, and it's based on both societal expectations and internal kind of identity factors like psychological factors and so on that we sort of slot into those sociological expectations, and that the sociological expectations kind of feed back into. So it's like this weird little feedback loop. So if you're asking about like gender euphoria, like if we get rid of all these categories, right? If there's no way to tell kind of what gender somebody is, then there's going to be no sort of affirmation of that self-schema as other people recognizing your self-schema and treating you the way that you would expect to be.
Could I weigh in on that very briefly?
Yes, and then I'll go to Jack.
I just want to say, I think people have ideas about who they are, gender, gamer, anything, and people get happy when they're treated in ways that conform with those ideas. I don't think that assigning roles to people based on their birth sex is the best way to procure those positive feelings. I think that even in a world where we assigned no inherent expectations to behavior, there are still ways for people to find categories, to make categories for themselves, ones based on their choices, and then to feel euphoric or happy or otherwise when they're affirmed in those ways. I mean, our concept of gender euphoria is usually framed around the fact that prior to them experiencing it, they were denied something, either a sense of recognition, self-identification, or in the cases for, you know, like transition, like biological transition, sometimes it's actually like a bodily change. But all of those things, the underlying criteria, can still be achieved without gender needing exist. It's really just a matter of allowing people to be happy and to be who they are.
Okay.
Yeah, so
Jack, please.
the idea of gender euphoria can come at like you can get gender euphoria from any number of different places, whether it's people that you care about in your life treating you the way you want to be treated after having been denied such treatment for a long period of time, or, you know, just looking the way you want to be able to look. And for a lot of trans people, that would be a struggle regardless, you know, like it's hard to physically transition. Look, going through puberty 2 times, not great, especially when the second time you have like a job and adult responsibilities. Not ideal. And so it can be a struggle, and achieving something, even for like a little bit of time, yeah, your brain's like, good job. And you feel nice about it. You know, it's your brain patting you on the back a little bit. bringing your identity and your body into somewhat a bit of harmony. And at least that's how I interpret it anyway.
In order for that to happen, there would have to be some kind of like inherent thing about you, right? That means
Yeah, and
that...
harmony implies that there's like a match between two things, and it seems like we're denying the existence of that internal thing, which is some gender identity. And yeah, I guess the problem
What is the
I'm having,
internal thing?
the internal thing, it seems to be that we have some internal feeling of like gender.
Yeah.
Well, we
I
have
mean-
some internal. Well, gender means a million things. We have some internal feelings about
I don't
ourselves.
think I think we have an internal like. I think that there is like some internal feeling of gender that we seem to understand. And as
What
to
do you
the
mean
gender
when you
In
say
a
that?
practical sense, what is gender there? Like, are we talking about how we want to be treated? Are we talking about the names we would prefer to be called? Are we talking about how our body should look? What
Yeah,
specifically?
I think that all of those things are encompassed under the
There's something
concept
I
of
want to
gender.
So, and before you do, because once you do, it's gonna take a while. so I just want Red Charlie, who had her hand up, want to make sure I can get something from her. Go ahead.
Yeah, so like I was thinking of something like, what does everyone here think? So we're talking about gender abolition, right? And like this intersects obviously with gender euphoria, gender dysphoria. If we put someone like a baby on like an island and they have no society, right? Would gender dysphoria be possible? Like if there is no gender in society, could someone feel gender dysphoria, or would it just be body dysphoria?
I think that, I mean, obviously, gender being a social construct would rely on existing within some sort of social construct, but you would still have like body dysmorphia. I think that's definitely a thing that would still occur. You can look at the case of like intersex people, for example, who have a disproportionately high rate of body dysmorphia, especially if their parents choose what they want their child to have in their downstairs department or whatever. So that would still exist.
So let's go to Demon Mama. Let's go to Demon Mama, then Vivian, then Destiny. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think that gender euphoria is just another term for the joy that comes from self-realization and self-actualization. I don't really see like gender. I think that when we talk about gender euphoria, there's obviously a lot of personalization, and if gender is a huge issue in your life that has stood in the way of you being able to express yourself in one way or another to varying degrees, I think it is absolutely natural that we would have a term for like, hey, this shit is fixed and I feel great about being able to self-realize and self-actualize. Like those are things we already acknowledge as concepts for all kinds of other things. I don't think that it's any different when it comes to gender. Now, I acknowledge that gender is a really, really hazy subject, and that's why there's some confusion and unclearness or whatever on some of these terms. But the reality is that there's all kinds of examples in our life where we achieve something that is important to us as an individual, and we receive euphoria as a result of that. I don't think that's any different for gender, and I don't think that would disappear in a in a gender abolitionist or gender ascensionist, as I'm going to use from now on, society, because I think it would just be understood slightly differently. I think that there would still be people who are like, oh yeah, oh my god, this like dress feels great. Being seen as beautiful by people is fucking awesome. I love this shit. They just wouldn't necessarily call it gender euphoria. That's just a term that exists as a product of our current environment, in my opinion. And it's very, very similar to many other types of euphoria that we receive.
Let's go to Vivian and then Destiny.
Yeah, so as to the desert island question, I think like what Jack said about like so I think there are a couple of different kinds of dysphoria. There's like body dysphoria where like it's, you look in the mirror or you look down at yourself and you're like, this shit just doesn't fit, right? That's probably closer to like dysmorphia. And then there's a kind of social dysphoria that exists, right? When your internal schema doesn't match with the way other people perceive you, and maybe you're treated differently. Somebody uses the wrong pronouns or like misgenders you, whatever, right? In the desert island equation, like that's really difficult to happen because you're not fucking interacting with anybody else, right? It could be possible that you could experience a kind of social gender euphoria in such a situation, because you might find that there are like certain activities that you like doing by yourself that fit with this internal schema, and you could be like, well, this is a job or a thing that is meant for me. Like I'm more in tune with this kind of activity, perhaps. But I don't think that the social dysphoria could exist because there's nobody to sort of enforce upon you that your internal schema doesn't match their person schema of you.
Destiny?
Okay, so two things. So one, gender euphoria, my understanding is it doesn't refer to just like, oh, I'm being treated how I want to be treated, or oh, like I'm happy that I'm getting to do something I wanted to do. My understanding is that it specifically refers to the idea that you are being treated in society as the gender that you identify as. That feeling of like doing something or being treated in a way such that it closely like harmonizes with your gender identity is supposed to present like a special feeling that feels euphoric, as opposed to the dysphoria that one might feel when there's a massive mismatch between their expression and their identity, or the perceived gender and their gender identity, for the first thing. And then for the second thing, I guess like for this idea that like gender is just 1,000,000% socially constructed and like there is no internal gender anything at all, I guess like how do we deal conceptually with the intersex experiments where somebody's born intersex and the doctor just makes a call like, oh well, we're just going to make this person this sex, we're going to do the surgery, and then boom, and then some of these people end up growing up and they like kill themselves because they experience such dysphoria throughout their lives, nothing ever feels right. Like if it was all just socially programming, like shouldn't we be able to just say, oh well, they were treated as a male, they should have just grown up as a male and it should have been fine.
Well, we're
Two
conflating
things.
here.
Oh,
I
two
think we're
things, okay.
conflating.
Look at Jack and then Vaush, okay?
First off, there are multiple types of gender euphoria. One can be related to social stuff. Another can be related to body stuff, essentially. And as far as like intersex people, like it's very, 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 very rare that any intersex person is born with like a life-threatening condition where like the doctor's like, the genitals, I need to operate. That never happens. Like almost never happens.
There's one really famous case where it did that, right?
But just don't operate on the kid's genitals. Like just wait until they're an adult and they can make their own choice.
Well,
There is a really famous experiment that he was referencing, though, that like is often cited in like
John Money.
conversations around being trans and so on. I forget what it was called, but
Yeah,
yeah,
John
it was
Money.
an absolute medical monstrosity. Should have never fucking happened.
It wasn't intersex though. It was a botched circumcision, so he decided to do SRS on a kid.
Yeah, that was gross.
Look, well, the conflation between physiological and sociological criteria here is really, really important. So, with regards to the intersex thing, yeah, I would say that would probably be an instance of like a body dysmorphia, where there's the incompatibility there isn't necessarily, though it often can be, social rules, but it's your body not being the way you have some internal feeling it should be. And I think that very often is biological, but I wouldn't argue that's like necessarily a component of gender, or at the very least it wouldn't have to be. We can easily imagine a gender abolished world. So, kid's born, kid can have XY, XX, whatever genitals, doesn't really matter, treated all the same. And we can imagine in such a world, even if people don't really have a conceptualization of what a man or a woman is, that some people would still be uncomfortable with their body, would still want to change it through, hormone surgery, that sort of thing. And that would be fine. That'd be good. I don't know if that needs to be a component of gender, because without gender, such a thing would still take place. And I do think, and this varies from person to person, but I think a lot of dysphoria and euphoria also come from a set of feelings people have about the way given gender should look, even if that's not an inherent component of the gender identity itself. So an example of this would be that there are plenty of woke feminist trans women who are perfectly aware of the fact that cisgender women grow hair on their arms and legs and armpits. It just, everyone does. I mean, almost everyone. Some people are naturally hairless, but almost everyone does. And in spite of a perfectly consistent, rational understanding that that is in fact the case, these trans women will often do everything in their power to make themselves as hairless as possible. And in doing so, they're not so much trying to look like a cis woman in a biological sense. They're trying to conform to expectations. But if we didn't have those gendered expectations about how cis women should groom themselves and wax their armpits or what have you, would that be a component of dysphoria for trans women? Or if we lived in a world without that expectation, would trans women be okay, all of them, I mean, having hairy armpits and going, oh, yeah, fine, this is fine? It's interesting. I mean, there's no hard line to split these two concepts.
It feels like we literally are making It feels like basically the argument is that like nobody in here believes that trans people would exist if like we didn't have gendered roles in society. Does everyone in here believe that? Because that's what it sounds like I'm
There
hearing.
would still
No.
be people with sexual.
Wait, why would
dysphoria.
you be trans at all if there were no gender roles in society, unless there was some
Wait a
underlying
second.
fact of the matter?
So
with their
I think
body.
that basically everyone would probably fit what we currently recognize as trans. People would express themselves in ways that we currently do not allow people to express themselves, in ways that we clinicalize and call deviant and whatnot. I think is actually we talked about this earlier. I talked about how there's tons of people who like for me not transitioning was ridiculously painful, enough that it pushed me like to aggressively pursue transition. Not everyone's to that degree, but many people do chafe against the roles that they're put into, just to different degrees. I think that we would have a society where maybe side analysis freely.
Sounds like what you've done is you've just like conveniently like recreated gender roles, like or you've recreated some internal gender expression. So we said, let's say that we eliminate all gender roles and all gender expression from society and all that stuff. Well, there's still going to be some people that feel dysphoria based upon their primary and secondary sexual characteristics that might require sex reassignment surgery or hormone replacement therapy.
That'll always
Like,
happen.
well, it sounds like, well, yeah, but when you say that, it sounds like you actually are saying that there is some underlying fact of the matter. Even if we eliminated the whole concepts entirely, there necessarily must be some underlying fact of the matter.
I think.
If
Wait,
people
but
still
again,
need to
we're
feel the need to
conflating.
Physiological
We
thing
don't-
that you
we
can
don't
do on a
think
medical
that-
level if you need to.
Yeah, we don't think that the social components of transness or of gender are things that need exist, but there are still going to be people who, for biological reasons, want their bodies to look and behave differently than how they do.
How
But
do they
that
want them
isn't
to look and behave,
inherently-
though?
I mean,
Because some
look,
people
it's
who
like,
are born with a
have,
given
we have
set
a
of
bunch of
genitals want a
trans
different
people
one.
here.
Yeah.
We have a bunch of trans people here.
Look at your
I
eyes.
transitioned because I wanted to look and feel different than what I did before. And like
Oh.
that was definitely a component of it. It wasn't all entirely how people look at me.
Yeah, but like, is it just by chance that like all of those feelings tend to conform with like the Western understanding of like
No,
how?
but wait,
I-
that's what I- wait,
right?
Hold on, no, hold on, hold on.
people, I just talked
That's
about
culture.
that though with the shaving example. So people's understanding of what a given body looks like or what a sex looks like is influenced by social roles surrounding that sex, a la waxing armpits. But that's not an inherent thing. We're taught that. I believe that in a world without gender, people who experience sexual dysphoria would still want to get corrective surgery for that, and that's good.
What
and
would
they
the
should.
dysphoria be though if there was no expectation? Where does that
So,
dysphoria?
so hold on, let's let a trans individual in to help answer these.
That's interesting. What would the dysphoria be if there was no?
So hold on, let's let a trans individual in to help answer these.
Corrective surgery for that, and that's good.
What
and
would
they
the
should.
dysphoria be though if there was no expectation? Where does that dysphoria?
So
That's actually an interesting point. What would the dysphoria be if there was no expectation? Fuck, that's a good question. I mean, no, I don't know if I'm on board with gender abolitionism, but I'm curious what they would say to that.
let's let a trans individual in to help answer these. Let's go to Alice, and then Vivian, and then Demon. Okay.
Just to address that, Destiny. So, if the roles were removed, I don't care. I'm not. I would have done. I would have expressed myself however the hell I wanted to express myself, regardless, and I still do. Like, if you see me on streams, there's many times where I am not presenting femininely. But I have primarily sexual characteristics. Dysphoria based on sexual characteristics. I still would have had that dysphoria regardless of what the social expectations were, because it's based purely on the sexual characteristic component, not the societal expectation. Now, maybe I would have like Vaush said.
Like what? Like you said, that you having a dysphoria that's based on some like biological characteristic. That dysphoria, like what is that characteristic? Like what is it?
I don't like having a dick. I don't like not having boobs. I don't like there's like literal physical components. I don't like
yeah,
the
but
way
like,
that.
there's literally we have a category that's
the thing though. Like you would probably say that those are like the concern with having those would stem from a societally constructed, like, I guess, personality or person, I suppose. So like, generally we have a construct that, okay, women have boobs and vaginas and men have dicks and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, I think you could still say that's a social construct, right? Like the expectation for that.
like created to describe dicks and boobs and its sex, right? Like these are all like primary or secondary
Yes.
sexual characteristics.
Yes, I have
so
dysphoria
people
based
might
on my
want to
sex,
change
not
their
my gender.
sex, but that doesn't have to. I don't buy the argument that gender must exist because there are people who have problems with their sexual characteristics.
I'm not
Just
saying
because
I'm,
people
what I'm
are-
saying. I'm not arguing whether or not gender exists or whatever in some like broad category. What I'm getting at is that the concept of sex or gender, even gender being abstracted of sex, but we'll say sex even as a category, that there seems to be some underlying fact of the matter that's not just like an agreement that we have with each other. There seems to be some underlying fact of the matter there.
Yeah, of course there are underlying components of sex that aren't exclusively so. Wait,
You're
was that
asking
what we were
why
arguing
people
about?
want. Wait, you're asking why people want things. Why does somebody want? Why do you think that the only reason that say like somebody could want to get ripped as fuck is only social, or do you think they could just be like, hey, I think I look good this way, and I want to be ripped as fuck, and I want other people to see me ripped as fuck. There's no. I mean, like
So goddamn confusing.
that is a yeah. There's probably some weird process in our mind that determines why we want that thing, but we don't need to even try and categorize that. That's separate from somebody's ability to identify as who they are. That's what I think we're trying to get at here. There's a consistent complaint.
It's not the
I
same.
think all of this plays into something that I've been playing around with for a while and trying to like work out whether it's like congruent or makes sense. And you know what? There's a lot of big brains on this panel, so maybe I can just float something, right? I said this to Destiny before, but like probably not really that open otherwise. I think there is a good argument to be made for a component of gender being like a secondary sexual characteristic, a neurophysiological or trait or set of traits that map onto sort of a social schema. A social framework, right? And like I said earlier, they sort of like feed into each other. So there's like this internal component, which is something that's like inherent and almost essential, possibly fluid, can change over time, but is part of the sort of like lens through which we view society, which is informed by actual physical, like neurophysiological construct within the brain.
I don't think I disagree with you, but the arguments that the other people are making are in complete contrast to that, where it seems to be, and I might be misunderstanding, but it seems like the other arguments is that there's no underlying like fact of the matter at all.
Wait, there is sex.
On the arms and stuff like does nothing to address that. Obviously, this would be like a societal expectation that is like pushed upon people, and they use their internal map, right, where they're like, okay, so I identify as this gender, blah blah blah, and this is what society expects of me because of that, and then they will engage in those kinds of actions. But there's still something internal going on there that informs them that they ought to identify as this gender, and then they see other people who also identify as that gender behaving in certain ways and are sort of pressured to match that.
I
guess I'm.
All right. I think it's fair to say though that with expressing, like it's gonna have to stem from some perceived stimuli on our part. Like if there's something that you want to express as, you need to have perceived it. Like there could be some sort of phenomena out there that we have no perception of what it's like at all. It'd be totally different to anything that we've perceived or understood or even begin to understand. But it does seem like it would have to stem from some sort of social preference of or some external stimuli. So like even if you could quantify it as a social construct, like it has to be something that's perceived, right? No.
I guess I'm really I want to know what the confusion is, Destiny. I feel like this has been like we're talking in circles at this point. So like are you saying like you think that there's like an underlying thing that's making people want to transition?
Yeah, so my
Like, what-
problem is that it seems like there are. I actually can't even keep track of this point because it's hard to keep. It's hard to keep.
Yeah.
I'm not blaming you guys. It's just in terms of understanding what people are saying. It feels like a lot of people on this panel, or some people on this panel, believe that gender and sex are wholly arbitrary things that are like not only are they ill-defined, you actually can't define them. That the concept of sex or gender literally escapes definition.
Which that's not correct either, because you can define it. They're just very broad categories that are 100% susceptible to change, and then generally the only cutoff is utility, which I think that's a fine definition. I mean, there might be some subjectivity in terms of utility, but I think due to the subjectivity of it, it does make it more widely applicable to the vast array of different people out there, so... Anyway,
because there might be some exception to the rule or whatever, that these things are indefinable. And my challenge to that is it feels like there does seem to be some sort of internal identification with this concept that makes it so that you can't just simply say, oh, well, sex and gender are just totally not real things. We can abolish them and they could just be names we give ourselves. It seems that that would be contrary to what most people...
So that's an interesting point as well. I mean, I think with gender abolitionism, you can't really just... I mean, you could... If you define gender as a set of roles or portrayed characteristics of a particular person, right? Which in that case could be literally fucking anything. Anything that the human mind can really come up with, technically. Which is, for all intents and purposes, infinite. It just seems like that if you were to just get rid of the term gender altogether and just kind of have like people, like they're I don't know if that would just get rid of the, because that's kind of what she was saying, right? God, this is so confusing. That's what she was saying. She's like, oh yeah, like even if there was no such thing as a gender in which, you know, you had to have long hair, like maybe there could be guys that have long hair, there could be girls, there could be people in between who have no... Like if you have people who have sexual characteristics of both genders, I mean, like that would be fine too. Like you wouldn't need to like alter them or try to make them fit a certain normalcy. But holy fuck, this is confusing as shit. I don't think, like, if you got rid of just the, I mean, I think people would still just do what the fuck they wanted, which would be fine, but I still think that, given that definition of gender, that's still a gender, right? Right.
Internally. And then my example for that is that one is you get kids that have like botched sex reassignment surgeries at birth. They go through life feeling miserable, even if they're socialized a certain way, and then they end up killing themselves. The one example that Vivian brought up, I wish I could remember the name of this case, really popular. Or the idea that people, even in a society where there are no gender expectations, would still feel like a trans person. They would still feel like there's some fundamental mismatch between their body's characteristics and the gender that they identify with internally, or the sex even they identify with internally.
I'm sorry.
I think I can.
If I missed the opening of this, but when has anyone said that sex is undefinable? Everything that you just described
I know
is sexual.
at the very least, Demon Mama was saying that. Or am I wrong on that, Demon Mama? You're not saying that?
Oh my god.
So here,
You get lost in your own Drummond. Let me talk. It's my turn, right? Right? It's my turn.
Okay, fine. Go, and then we'll get you in Jack soon.
Okay. Listen. So okay. God. Like, first of all, no, I don't. I mean, I do believe that all things that we use that are linguistically are to some degree a social construct, to a certain degree. Yeah. Obviously, there are very different parameters for those things. This is just a fact of language. Humans communicate by making constructs and transmitting them to one another.
Language.
Right. Well,
we have to be if we're talking, though.
No,
right?
we're not. I'm talking about the concept of gender.
You're clearly confused. Just let me explain. I'll make it clear. Like the fact of the matter is, like, I do believe that sex has sex is useful as a biological term to some degree. I think we can go back and forth about how we define that, and scientists have and are. But sex is a descriptor of biological processes, some of which we do not fully understand yet. Gender is, in my opinion, the social side, our self-perception, our expression, these sort of things. Right. Well, no, but there does seem to be. And I don't believe that there is as much of a connection as some people think. For example, our society has predominantly assumed that gender and sex are 100% one-to-one. If you're female, there is some essential femaleness that makes you like frilly dresses and blah, blah, blah. I don't think that's the case. I think that many people have all of these different tastes and that we should move these things apart, that gender is better understood as a concept of identity.
It's almost like you could just say that gender is just preference in portrayal actions, if in actionable portrayals, right? Like that sounds largely what it is. Like, you know, whether it's like your pronouns, your fucking clothes, your literally your genitalia, you know, that kind of stuff, and just how you look, like whether you put on makeup and shit like that, you know. So yeah,
of social interaction, and that we don't really...
I just think the word social construct is so fucking confusing, because it's like, yes, technically this microphone, like what I'm perceiving it as, is a social construct to some degree, but at the same time there's also the actual mic here, which is made up of a bunch of things, you know, it's got wiring in it, it's all a bunch of good stuff. But I just think it makes it so fucking confusing. So it's just like, let's just get rid of that word, because that's such a vague term and it could mean 100 different things. But I guess we'll just start with gender is portrayal and sex is the biological formation of your body. So
really use it, like we don't really use gender like all that much in a meaningful way. That we should make it more useful by acknowledging that this is a part of identity. Now, there
Okay,
are
how does that make sense? I don't understand.
Hold on. I'm not done yet. So, let me pull from personal experience, and I think this will make sense. When I first began my transition, I believed that I would probably someday get sexual reassignment surgery. I am no longer interested in that, because I realized over time that that was not something that was causing dysphoria for me, for whatever reason. Now, previously, there was a social expectation in my mind about what a woman is, and that that definition included needing to have a vagina or a vulva, or however you want to use the terminology, okay?
Right.
I no longer believe that.
And still internally wanted to be a woman, right?
Oh, wait, what I don't understand is we're specifically saying that anybody can call themselves any gender they want. How can you? How does that view matching what you're saying now? You're saying, so earlier you said anybody can call themselves any gender they want, or anybody can identify as anything. But now you're saying, well, hold on, maybe there is some underlying fact of the matter. How are these two definitions congruent?
Destiny, you're missing the difference between sex and gender. Like, this is the core problem that's happening.
I'm
You're
only
not
talking
acknowledging
about. Hold on. Stop. First of all, I'm only talking about sex right now, okay? We'll just exclusively talk about sex. Do you agree that, like, sex exists as some, like, actual, like, definable category that people understand?
Yeah, to some degree, yes, of course. Obviously, it is a real thing. Like,
okay, do you think that gender is somewhat, like, causally abstracted off of sex, or no?
No,
I
not
would say
really.
it's correlative.
I mean, I think there's. I think
the fact that like 98% of people are cisgender.
Hold on a second. You asked me a question. I want to answer the question.
So, okay, please do without anecdotes and analogies and just answer the question.
Oh, quit whining. When did you become such a whiny bitch?
It's so boring because you guys take like 3 minutes to answer your question instead of just like giving the answer. It's so annoying.
I'm sorry. I couldn't give you a one-sentence definition of gender.
You can give me as many sentences as you want. I just don't need like 50 analogies to bodybuilding or anecdotes.
Okay.
Just like give the answer.
Jump in. I'll take longer than both you combined.
And if you could just answer the question so we can move on to Jack, because Jack also wants to jump in.
Can you state the question for me again so I can get the answer?
Okay, so it felt like earlier all of us were saying because I think Joe was arguing that there must be some definition of woman, whether we're talking gender or sex. I think earlier you guys were talking sex, but I guess we can say sex or gender, right? For either of these, it seemed like Joe was arguing that there was some underlying definition that people seemed to understand internally, but then it felt like Demon Mama. Your argument was like, well, no, literally anybody could call themselves any gender they want and it would be okay. It should be a descriptor like a name. That was the comparison.
Yeah.
But now it sounds like you're saying, well, there is some underlying fact of the matter related to gender.
For gender, I don't believe that sex and gender. I think that in our society right now, we erroneously ascribe gender as something that like grows out of sex. I don't think that's the case, actually.
Okay, if that's not the case, then how do we deal?
I mean, you could say that. But yeah, I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be true. I mean, there's definitely, like, it's heavily correlative is what it comes down to. Like, most people are cis. but it does seem it's hard to say that that causes it. I mean, I think it probably plays a large influence, but that influence is social in and of itself. Because if you are born a girl and you have parents who are just going to raise you as a girl, like it's just easier to fall into those norms and conform to it, especially if you're comfortable with it, and same with if you're a guy. But I do think that it's just that we associate the roles of that particular gender with that particular sex, and that's why this is probably so confusing. I don't know.
Deal with the kids.
Okay.
How do we deal with the kids that get the surgery and are intersex to somebody else and then end up killing themselves?
Wait, that's a sex thing. Wait, I'm sorry. Hold on. We really need to split this line right here, okay? Sex is real. It is, to an extent, arbitrary. It is not binary. There's a bimodal component.
You just said the same thing like 3 times. We understand. Go. Okay.
Okay, so yeah, just to hammer it in, because it keeps coming up again, gender, that's a lot more complicated. I think that gender is broadly just another social category that allows us to express who we are. Most people are okay with the category that's thrown at them.
Okay. This is my question.
Okay.
I want to hear an answer to this. Wait, I need to hear an answer to this.
Yes, no.
I'm
Yes, no.
sure Jack will have an answer.
Okay, then for Jack, I'll shut up for the rest of the panel. Because we keep dancing around this so much, and people want to hop to every definition to avoid answering this question. Okay,
so performatively angry.
If you
right
were to take somebody, please don't call me performative. Okay, your entire everything is performative.
I just want to hear.
Okay, hold on. I'm gonna have to start muting
everything
people.
you do.
Holy shit, don't worry. I'm gonna start muting people. Don't worry. I'm gonna meet people.
My understanding is that if you were to take a kid at birth, okay, and you were to just arrest them to another sex, okay, and they were to grow up, that gender, that's not just a performative thing. That's not just a social thing. That there is some internal content there related to gender, and that person will grow up with dysphoria and kill themselves. It wasn't just a matter of having the right sex parts or whatever, that there's like some deeper gender content there.
Go ahead.
So I think
if there wasn't...
No.
So the idea is that there is a correlation there, but it doesn't necessarily have to happen all the time, because there are botched circumcisions. Okay, there are things that happen. There are intersex people who exist who grow up and they're perfectly fine.
I guess my thing is like, why couldn't that still just be in the brain? Like, why does it have to be fucking like what? Like, why does it have to be? It just seems like it's in the brain, which is where. I mean, when you say it's a social construct, like you're presupposing that there's some sort of generative force, which would be the brain, which is emitting all of this perceived BS that we experience. So
they never know. Or you can take a look at like how people are born with like chimerism, and like, you know, you grow up to be like an 80-year-old grandpa and you go in for like stomach cramps to the hospital, and it turns out you had ovaries the entire time. You didn't know. So like there are these ideas, but when you get down to it, we don't know what makes people trans, and we don't know what makes people react the way they do, because it's a complicated topic, and it's kind of what I was trying to get at when I talked to you earlier, and was just like,
I mean, I guess that's technically true, but I mean, don't like, holy fuck. I swear to fucking God, like our brains react and mimic, right? Like don't we have like a mirror neurons, right? Like isn't the whole fucking point of that, like when we see somebody carrying a large stack of heavy boxes, we look at that and be like, oh my God, I don't want to be in that position. I don't want to be carrying all those boxes, because we can empathize what the fuck that looks like. But the only reason we can empathize is because we know what heavy boxes are like, because we've experienced heavy boxes, or we've picked up something heavy, or we've held something in our hand, and like the bigger it is, the harder it becomes, and that's why we can like perceive that. So I mean, I think that's just like a lot of what we, especially when we're little, like all we fucking do is mimic. Like that's how we learn to talk. You know, we look at our parents' like lips and everything, and like we just learn to talk from there. Yeah, I think a lot of it is perceived stimuli, but like, I mean, perhaps there's something along the lines of like maybe you're born a guy and then you see a girl wearing I'm doing analogies, which is probably not helpful, but anyway, you're born a guy, you see a girl, she's wearing a dress, you think, oh my God, that's pretty. That looks really nice on her. Like, I would like to wear that too, or I'd like to look like that. I mean, I don't think there's anything like wrong with that. I mean, I don't think that makes but it just means that like, oh, you like, it's people find things that are aesthetically symmetrical to be attractive, and then we have a natural biological innateness to be sexually attracted. Like we have a natural sexual attraction, what I'm trying to say in a lot of words. And then I mean I don't think it's super hard for us to be interested in the different dynamics of that, you know, whether that be from the feminine side or the masculine side or whatever. But then I think what we're finding out now is that these things don't need to be set in stone, and we can play around with them in whatever capacity we want. And given that newfound freedom and our ability to literally do anything that we want in this first world society, it's becoming more prevalent due to this. And I mean, there's a lot of philosophy, but I think it's largely psychology. So, but yeah, I mean, it can be defined as virtually whatever you want, not everything, but for all intents and purposes, it's infinite. Now, there's infinites of different sizes. Like, it can't literally be everything under the sun. Like, you can't identify as an axe murderer and go around and fucking axe murder people. But I think, like, in terms of gender expression, I mean, yeah, it's psychology, right? Like, I'm pretty sure we know this shit.
The more you know about somebody, the more complicated it gets.
Oh my god.
And
If gender doesn't
I also think these guys are doing the least helpful portrayal of shit. I mean, I thought, I mean, she had some good stuff to say, and he's usually pretty good with it. But I mean, yeah, I just think like when you throw out like 40 analogies, it just obfuscates the point more than helps clarify.
Snap onto sex. Why is it that why wouldn't we advocate then at this point for literally just like mental transition for trans people? Like, just think about your gender differently.
Because that doesn't work for all trans people. But
why not?
That's
my question is why not?
Some trans
because
people
physiological...
have like issues with their bodies that they need to change, and we know that we know that has better medical outcomes. Like even if you want to throw. I know not all trans people have dysphoria. I was getting to that.
I'm not saying that. Like, look, to get something, so they don't have body dysphoria, right? Like that's not an issue. So they just encourage them to think about their gender differently, and then surely it would go away if it was completely fucking like socially constructed. Obviously, it isn't. Obviously, there's some kind of inherent fucking thing that is informing the way that they think about their gender within society. Like,
I think this is the problem when you just look at only philosophy and not enough biology or not enough science. It just gets like way more confusing. And we don't really understand consciousness yet, but it seems to me like it's largely just I think when you get into the philosophy and you use words like social construct, they're just very vague, and they need a lot of fleshing out before you can even get off the fucking ground. So anyway, like
regardless of any kind of like body thing going on at all.
So the issue being that for some trans people, you can't be taught to think differently about your body. That that's literally part of look Destiny, it's literally in the example you gave of somebody who's raised after a botched circumcision and like got like an SRS surgery, whatever, never knew that they were trans. That person was completely taught to think about their gender in a certain way. It still made them miserable.
Yeah,
so you
then
can't
why?
do it.
Wait,
that's
because,
like we don't know. We're not scientists.
Your brain has...
Okay. So my understanding is Destiny wants this to like his main critique was into gender abolitionism, which Vaush is a big proponent for. But fuck, man. So if gender abolitionism is oh my god. Is my screen not being recorded? It better be. What? Oh well. Okay, anyway. Sorry. So, Destiny's critique was of gender abolitionism. Just to clarify, Vaush is a big proponent of that. His big thing is... It seems to me like the only possible way what Vaush could be talking about would be true is if you did a semantic shift over time where the term gender just wasn't a thing, and just anybody could portray as what they wanted, and there was no like stigma or questioning. Like nothing would be weird effectively. I mean, there would always just be like new random shit that people were portraying as. Now there could and that's hard to say as well. I mean, I think we're constantly changing, so I think that's normal. But I think in addition to that, you're going to run into issues where a lot of people will normalize stuff. Like a lot of women tend to like to wear very similar clothes. But then again, that moves as well. I mean, guys used to wear high heels in certain cultures, you know. So, I mean, it'll likely keep changing, but I do feel like there will probably always be a large normalization of just clothing and makeup and stuff like that among cis people. But so I mean, like that might change, but I don't know.
Has an internal. Wait, please. Your brain has a map as to what your body is supposed to look like. There is a physiological understanding that people have. As far as I can tell, it has to do with hormone washes when you're still.
I understand what you're saying. I agree with you, Vaush, but that's the argument that I'm making.
Wait, hold on. Wait, please. Okay. So what we're talking about right now is if there's some mismatch, either because of a botched surgery or because of just things didn't pan out as they should have, perhaps. There is some physiological discomfort with the way one's body is organized. That is a purely biological and sexual phenomena. Now, because our society associates gender with sex, it will remain the case that people who experience that phenomena, that physiological phenomena.
I don't like these words, biological and then social, like, because they're. It's almost like the fucking chicken and the egg example. Like, which came fucking first? Like, when they're both normatively baked into this conversation, and it almost just serves to like, okay, well, let's operate from this as a fundamental, but it doesn't even matter which fucking one you do. I mean, just as long as you pick one. Like, I think for Destiny, since he's more like he seems like he's a bit more in line with like the hard sciences on stuff. Not that these other guys aren't, but it seems like they're approaching this more from a social perspective. But I think since just because he identifies it as that way, I think to describe it as conscious phenomenon would probably be more helpful. Maybe. Anyway.
When completely divorced inherently from social factors, society associates gender with sex, it will remain the case that people who experience that phenomena, that physiological phenomena, when completely divorced inherently from social factors, may still feel as though there are other correlative social factors that tie into that. That a person who is a trans woman who wants to change the way their body looks might also think that they want to wear frilly dresses or what have you. But I don't believe, and as I understand it, the literature doesn't support the idea that this is inherent or biological. Instead, people grow up learning what women are supposed to look like, what men are supposed to look like. And that's a large component of the social dysphoria. That not only is your body not looking the way you want it to, but then you realize, oh God, well, people with the kind of body that I want to have, they also do X, Y, Z, and what have you. And that can conflate the sociological and the psychological characteristics. But what you're describing, botched surgeries and what have you, sexual dysphoria, this is a physiological phenomena. This would happen on a desert island.
Yeah, but I know, but I'm going a step further, and I'm saying it seems like gender is physiological as well. It seems to be the case that it does trace to some part of the brain. And if we talk about like research,
what is gender? What do you mean by gender?
One at a time. So, Destiny, finish whatever point you're trying to make, and then I'm going to go to Vivian. Now I'm going to go to Demon Mama. Then back to Jack. All right.
Sure. So when I talk about the gender that you use here, the term I'm using here is gender identity. So the gender that you identify as.
Just pause this for a second, because for some reason.
And then I'm going to go to Vivian. Now I'm going to go to Demon Mama. Then back to Jack. All right.
Sure. So when I talk about the gender.
The
term I'm using here is gender identity. So the gender that you identify as.
Just pause this for a second, because for some reason.
And then I'm going to go to Vivian. Now I'm going to go to Demon Mama. Then back to Jack. All right.
Sure. So when I talk about the gender. The term I'm using here is gender identity. So the gender that you identify as.
Just pause this for a second. For some reason.
And then I'm going to go to Vivian. Right. Now I'm going to go to Demon Mama. Then back to Jack. All right.
Sure. So when I talk about the gender.
Alrighty, there we go. Sorry about that.
It seems like that maps onto something in the brain that's not just your sexual characteristics. My understanding is that when people do like the brain scans and they look at the white matter and everything of people who identify as transgender, and they look at their brains, they actually see, they're like, oh wow, this trans woman, their brain actually more resembles that of a cisgender woman than a cisgender male, pointing to like some, like that there might be some like something in the brain that's not just your sexual characteristics. My understanding is that when people do like the brain scans and they look at the white matter and everything of people who identify as transgender, and they look at their brains, they actually see they're like, oh wow, this trans woman, their brain actually more resembles that of a cisgender woman than a cisgender male, pointing to like some like that there might be some what everything is going to be for some. When you say for some to obfuscate, it doesn't get anywhere close.
Well,
to
there are trans women who don't experience sexual dysphoria.
I'm not necessarily. I'm just saying, like, it does seem to be that there is some underlying experience of gender that is independent from just what society tells you.
What experience?
So, no,
what things?
Vivian, she can answer the question. Maybe, I'm sure. Vivian, go ahead.
Destiny's right. There are like the literature doesn't necessarily support Vaush's position. It is inconclusive. The study that Destiny's talking about, I think, was done in like fucking Sweden or something, where they like measured a whole load of trans women's brains and said there are certain markers that are like similar to cis women's brains, right? But it's all very wishy-washy and fucking inconclusive. The reason I brought up like people who have like dysphoria or want to change their gender or whatever, but don't have like sexual dysphoria, right? Don't have like body dysphoria, is that this indicates that there's something beyond like simply, the what Vaush was talking about with the hormone washes and room or whatever, and your body doesn't match, blah, blah, blah. You have the sexual dysphoria. But there are people who also have like a social dysphoria, right? Without experiencing the body dysphoria. And so there has to be some sort of like psychological process or like...
That is not... Wait, hold on. That is absolutely incorrect. Just because people chafe at social expectations given to them because of the biology they were born with, does not mean there is an inherent biological characteristic to those desires. This happens to people all the time. There are people who chafe.
I mean, what do you mean? Like, there's fucking mirror neurons, right? That are gonna like mirror certain phenomena and ideas, and that's another thing. Like, I mean, sure, we have mirror neurons and we can extrapolate information. I need to read up on some fucking neuroscience or something. But I mean, and I do get the structures. Fuck. That's a good question. Like, how does impact desires in the I don't get it. White matter is made up of a large network of nerve fibers, axons in your brain that allows the exchange of information and communication between different areas of your brain. Cool. It is found in the deeper tissues known as the subcortical area. White matter essentially functions in affecting learning and brain functions, modulating the distribution of action potential. Jesus. And coordinates communication between the different brain regions. While I couldn't find any specific information on how white matter impacts desires in the brain, it is possible that the white matter plays a role in transmitting signals related to desires between different parts of the brain, because it would seem like women have a proclivity to do things like wear dresses and put on makeup, but I think a lot of that is learned through social expectation, like in terms of their peers and their family and whatnot. I think in addition, I mean, then media as well, for fuck's sake. Now, I'm sure that there's a natural proclivity to be interested in that kind of stuff, just because it's normalized like shit. But it does seem like when you have trans people who have brains that are less similar to the cisgender people, it seems like I guess they get fuck, I don't even know if I should say this. Yeah, more neat research. Yeah, I mean, it's just weird because there is, it's the brain that does it, and why does the brain do it when? Like, because they've learned the male stimuli too. Like, you know, they've experienced it. They've watched the action movies. You know, they grew up with their dad telling them to play baseball or basketball, and you know, like all the traditional male stereotypes. But like, what is it about them that, you know, I maybe it has something to do with like the fetishization of it, or maybe it has to do with fuck. I don't know. I really don't know. I don't think anybody does. But I mean, that's just kind of like my general understanding of how the brain works, roughly. Like, my understanding is like when you're learning something, you're forming like new cognitive neural pathways that allow you to repeat the thing. And when you don't repeat or go down that neural pathway consistently, then you run into issues where you like lose that skill. So maybe you play basketball every day for like 2 years. You're going to have a neural pathway for shooting hoops and adapting to each situation. When you stop doing that, that pathway tends to die and you don't remember as much, or, you know, anything like that. So it seems like with this, oh fuck. It seems like with this, they've learned both, because that's what we all learn. I guess the key question is then, like, what is happening between the two? Like, what makes one brain go towards opposite gender? And it would have to, I wonder, I mean, it's correlative, but it might be the white matter. Distribution of action potential. Fuck. It might just be that women have statistically found traditional female gender stuff to be fuck, man, like, it's learned, but it's got to be something different, because this is strange. I think for the most part it's all learned though, but I think, oh, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, because there seems to be a lot of trans people with attempted suicides as well. But it really is there. Like, god damn, man. I don't know how to describe this, is what my issue is. So, another thing I thought I saw, and this was from like a gay guy talking about LGBTQ issues, specifically the trans topic, and he was saying that effectively, like, the amount of testosterone or estrogen, like, it's endocrinology. Like, if you have more estrogen, you tend to act more in feminine ways, and if you're, you know, like, you'd rather look pretty and feel special, you know, and whereas if you're a guy, you're like, oh, I want to grab you and fuck you, you know, just like very, very visual, as opposed to more about like portraying a particular image. So I mean, it might just be that, like testosterone specifically makes you more I'm sure it's more complicated than this, but I'm just trying to like simplify it for myself, and it's probably all dead fucking wrong.
With social expectations that are thrown their way without their consent in non-gendered context as well. And you said earlier that I was incorrect about a piece of literature that I cited. Could you tell me what exactly I was incorrect on, Vivian?
Sorry? No, you said that I believe the literature overwhelmingly supports blah, blah, blah. And
wait, what did I say? What was I wrong about?
Sorry? About there being an inherent component to gender identity, a biological component to gender identity, or a neurophysiological component to gender identity.
What did I say that was incorrect?
Sorry? You said I believe the literature supports that there is no inherent thing to like.
As in, it hasn't been found. As in, there's no indication that the physiological characteristics that are associated with being.
Actually indicates.
I think I can cut through this issue a little bit, which is, first of all, when you have brain studies, it is not so easy for us to associate what spots in the brain go to what societal features. So, for example, if you compare a brain scan of a trans woman to that of a cis female, and you come up with similar structures, we don't know why is that. There could be many things. There could be similarities because that trans person has been living as a woman for 10 years and interacting as a typical woman in her society is interacting, and that causes your brain to shape. Obviously, we all acknowledge that. Wait, the brain. No, I'm not done yet. The brain is obviously how we interact with the world. So I'm not saying that there isn't like that gender is just a magical thing or whatever. I just think that gender, the social side of it, we in our society currently try to map it onto sex all the time so that we can have these weird projections about who should be what based on what they're born as. It's a very outdated way of looking at things, and it doesn't map correctly. Yes, is there research that shows that trans women's brains are slightly more similar to cis women's brains? Yeah, but we don't know fucking why. We have no fucking clue, and they don't know fucking why either. They don't know if it's because the HRT reshapes your brain. They don't know if it's because of something that happened in your utero that causes development. I don't think that necessarily matters because we don't really know exactly what causes us to want and do certain things. That is a very complicated question. I don't think we
It
need
absolutely
What
matters.
position are we
though.
Hold on.
It
I'm not done yet. I know.
You're just trying to argue against something that I didn't fucking say, Demon Mama.
I'm not arguing. I'm not even arguing against you. I'm just trying to have my turn talking, Viv. That's it.
Okay, well.
I did not even argue. I didn't even necessarily disagree with you. I just
I don't even know what
I'm
we're arguing
also,
about anymore.
I'm familiar.
This is trash.
Well, what I'm trying to say
I
is
almost
that
wish it
yes,
was just
these
like
studies
two
do exist.
people or something, you know, because it seems like for the most, I don't even know, like these two are more closely aligned. These, I feel like you're in the middle, and I feel like everybody else, I'm not really sure how you are, but I feel like these three are kind of on the same spot. So, I'd say probably super far, like closer to the right, middle, left is what I'd say in terms of this subject, but I don't fucking know.
I don't think anybody here is contesting that these studies exist. We just don't know exactly what these things map to. It's interesting for sure that cis women and trans women have some similar brain function and or brain structure. That's great, but we don't know what causes that. We don't know if it's the socialization. We don't know if it's in utero.
It's likely fucking estrogen and testosterone, though, right? And then, I mean, obviously there's going to be social development that will increase the likelihood of that. But I mean, like, if otherwise you're growing up normal and your parents aren't, like, trying to make you, like, become a girl for any random fucking reason. Like, if it's, with all other things normal, I mean, I think it's just fair to say that it's likely just the amount of estrogen in you. But then, I feel like there are fucking people, and, you know, maybe some people, oh, jeez. Because maybe, I feel like there's also, like, people who are, guys who just have a lot of estrogen in their development, and they still are just totally fine with being a man. Like, they might be a more effeminate man, but they're totally fine with being a man. Fuck, I mean, it might also be, like, the perception that life might just fit their norms more. I mean, and that's a whole nother can of fucking worms.
There's a hormone bath. We don't know if it's being on HRT that changes the structure of your brain. There's all these things. Okay. And what I'm saying is that sex, the biological structure of how sex expresses itself in our bodies and brains is one thing.
It's true,
and gender,
actually.
How we interact with society, how we identify with others are different things. In our society, they're conflated frequently, which leads to imperfect ansers. And what
can I ask a question, just real quick question on Demo, just on that particular topic. Can you socialize somebody out of their gender?
Whoa.
What do you mean?
Could you socialize somebody out of their gender?
Can you explain like what you mean by that? Like how?
Sure. So let's say that you take a person and you raise them in a certain way. Could you take somebody that's like 5, 6, 7 years old or whatever, and just socialize them in a different way such that their gender identity changes?
Probably to some degree.
I would say almost certainly.
Yeah,
you would have. Okay. Why can't you just
wait,
say,
wait. You answer. You asked me a question. Let me.
Yeah, but you didn't answer. You were like dancing around because it was another question that you were too scared to answer because you know it's going to commit you to an answer.
Excuse me. Oh my God.
Okay. All right. Great.
Yeah, I don't think she'd said enough for you to
try
arrive
to
at
answer the
that
question.
No, she does because every time I ask a question, she dances around. It's like, well,
all right, don't worry. I'm gonna meet everyone. So look, dear mama, try to answer the question in a short amount of time. Then I'm going to go to Jack, and I'm going to go to Alice. She had her hand up as well. All right? So finish, like, seriously, like 30 seconds. I'm fucking time you.
With regard to gender, almost certainly. I would say that almost certainly you could do that. Now, would that be a good thing? Probably in most cases not. But if you had a kid, hold on.
What?
If you had a kid that was raised in like say a random like white kid who was raised by Native Americans who believe in Two-Spirit.
Okay, instead of talking about Native fucking Americans, just say something like it's almost like trying to get someone to stop being gay, you know, like they have this like social proclivity and you're basically telling them to tell it to fuck off. Like, it's probably not going to be good for that person. I mean, that's why trans people have like a high suicide attempt rate. Like, it's fucked up and they deal with anxiety and a bunch of other shit. So, I mean, yeah. Affirmation. It's not hard. That's
Maybe that child would understand themselves as a Two-Spirit instead of as a man or a woman.
Jesus Christ.
That is how you could how we socially construct gender is super important. Now, does that mean that it would that would directly affect their understanding of sex? Not necessarily. Maybe. It depends on the society and the words that we use.
Okay, so Jack and then Alice, all right? And then we can let the men back in if you want, but Jack and Alice, please.
to build on Demon Mama's point a little bit, and to kind of get at what I was talking about at the very beginning of this conversation, is that we have like anthropological evidence of both past and current societies across the world that have more than two gender identities, and like it definitely makes it a lot harder to say that, well, like sex maps onto gender identity, and like or gender identity maps onto sex when you have more than two and your understanding of sex is bimodal. So like this is definitely a giant issue that I think someone would have to explain if they're trying to conflate this thing, sex and gender. And also there are even fringe cases around the world where like through biological processes third sexes have been created. That is something that exists in the world, like heritable traits that are a third sex. So like it is a way more complicated issue than a lot of people on this panel are trying to make it. And I'm just gonna leave it at that.
Okay.
Well, I think I'm saying
Alice, and then we'll let other people back in.
Okay, all I really want to question is, right now, first off, third sex, I want a source for that, because I have researched that. I've never found that before. Any biologically heritable third sex, please do send me that. Second off, somebody talked about socialization and whether that could change. We literally went over this. So John to Joan, it was the John Money case. So that literally proves that socialization is not sufficient for gender. You can literally sexually reassign someone, raise them as a woman, and have them still not identify with that identity. You literally can't put it down purely to socialization.
We're doing it again.
Yeah,
what are we doing?
Wait, this is I have to
wait, hold on, wait. This is more complicated.
Okay,
May I please?
Okay, go ahead, Vaush.
This is more complicated.
Okay,
Fuck.
So, just because sex and gender are correlative in the sense that we are taught that characteristics associated with sex are also associated with the gender that we assign to people born of that sex. So, with that being said, there are a plethora.
I understand like this feeling, but it does seem like most of them are like, okay, this is really fucking confusing. How do I better describe this? And then they jump into some lengthy definition that just raises more questions than it answers. But fuck, let's keep listening. I mean, it's just, I feel like he's gonna say a bunch of shit, and then the problem is, like, the less concise it is, the more baggage is thrown in there, and sometimes it helps with precision, but a lot of times it just makes it more fucking vague, so...
Of social factors that could cause a person to chafe at social expectations that are given to them if those social expectations are somehow in conflict with those that are generally associated with the sex that their body wants them to be. That is to say, the sexual dysphoria that they feel is magnified because there are social characteristics that deviate from that which they're being taught. Now, if you were to raise some kid on a farm...
Now, he has a sociology degree, so this is probably why he's approaching it from this angle. And that actually, I think that was actually a pretty good definition for the most part. And here's the analogy.
On the moon, and that kid was born XY, you know, like you call him a boy here, okay? And you were to raise that kid, and you were to say, "Ayo, you're a woman, and you like dresses, and you do housework." I think that if you were to do that, and you were to do that, say, with many young boys and girls in the reverse sense, you would produce a social order about as arbitrary and about as stable as the one we have today. That the roles are arbitrary, but the group identifiers inform our placement within those roles. Now, if you were to take a person born XY, like a boy or whatever, and then raise them as a woman here in America today, there might be some agitation or dysphoria caused by the fact that they recognize there's a pretty significant difference between how they look and how they're treated relative to other people. And that might magnify issues. That might lead to them developing sexual or social dysphoria, depending on the ways in which they were raised, quote unquote, as a woman. So these factors, they conflate and they overlap significantly. But I reject the idea that people who kill themselves because of botched SRS surgery or intersex issues at birth or because of circumcision necessarily means that gender is an inherent biological concept, or that there's...
Alrighty. Fuck you. Fuck Reddit. I want to fucking go... Oh no, shit. It was this. Is what I had to do. Okay. The parietal lobe plays an important role in integrating... Important role in integrating information from several senses. Also processes spatial orientation, some parts of speech, visual perception, and pain and touch sensations. Okay, that's huge. That's like eyes, space around us, pain, touch, like everything effectively that we... It seems largely what's in front of us, what we're seeing. Occipital is the visual processing center of the brain. It is most referred to as the visual cortex. It is also the part of the brain where dreams originate. Ooh, fuck. Visual's interesting. Is it both? Holy fuck, they both relate to our eyes, maybe? I don't know. I should talk about fucking brain and neuroscientist about this shit. The cerebellum. The cerebellum's chief function are motion-related activities. Contributes to coordination, precision, accurate timing, but does not initiate movement. Oh, fuck. That's so weird. It contributes to coordination. And, okay, I see. So it's probably like the timing of the movements, largely, to summarize all that bullshit. But it doesn't initiate it. It just times it. It like sends a message to the part that starts it. It regulates fear and pleasure responses and some cognitive functions such as attention and language. Holy fuck. So, oh shit. Alright, that probably doesn't have, like, the pleasure, maybe. Probably would be relevant to the whole fucking gender thing. That probably... Probably the visual perception, that probably applies. I don't think that would. Maybe it would. To, like, dreams and shit, because maybe you're dreaming about being trans. Alright, brainstem serves as the brain's warning system and sets alertness levels. Okay. I wonder if that applies to, like, social stigma. Like, it probably does, but oh. God damn it, this would be fascinating. I should look up some studies for this. Temporal lobe is the chief auditory receptive area and contains the hippocampus, which is the chief region where long-term memory is formed. Also deals with high-level visual processing. So faces and scenes. That seems like it's... They all fucking overlap. In some capacity. The frontal lobe deals chiefly with cognition and memory. Ability to concentrate, judgment, consequence, analysis. Fuck. Problem solve, plan, personality, including emotional traits. Yeah, this is... I need to read a study, but this is useful. So I appreciate that, at least. Anyway.
There's a causal relationship.
I was going to watch this till Destiny, because we're not watching all fucking 4 hours of this shit.
Between the two. That needn't be the case. There are social explanations for those presences.
So Alice will respond, and then I'm wanting to hear from Red Charlotte, who hasn't been able to say anything.
Okay, also, I love you all very much. I have to sleep, though. Okay.
Right.
I agree with you that it doesn't necessitate that there is...
Alrighty. Yeah, I think a lot of those definitions, I mean, while they're interesting, you can approach them from a social or a biological perspective. And I mean, if you're like a typical materialist or something, then I think I feel like a materialist grasp of biology and like physics is probably going to be way better than something like psychology or sociology. Just because a lot of that shit's abstract and philosophy's very abstract, and social science, it's still science, but it's also like I don't even know where to begin. Alright, Google Scholar, here we come. Not that this will give me anything. Scholar. Let's see what we can find. Oh, jeez. That hurt my fucking brain. Alright. This just might be more psychology, maybe. Because psychology is kind of like the bridge between sociology and neuroscience, I guess is how I perceive it. It doesn't look like it's the full thing. They have little snippets here. Alright, I'm just gonna read the fucking abstract and then we're gonna call it quits. I mean, as fascinating as this is. So, also I'm not used to reading this loud. Or to reading out loud for this long. I'm gonna throw up. Evidence suggests that there are differences in the capacity for empathy between males and females. However, how deep do these differences go? Stereotypically, females are portrayed as more nurturing and empathetic, while males are portrayed as less emotional and more cognitive. Some authors suggest that observed gender differences may be largely due to cultural expectations about gender roles. However, empathy has both evolutionary and developmental precursors. Nice, yes, of course they do. And can be studied using implicit measures. Aspects that can help elucidate the respective roles of culture and biology. Holy shit. This article reviews evidence from ethology. What the fuck is that? It's a branch of zoology. Fuck. I'm just curious. The science of animal behavior. Okay. So this would be ethology. Jesus. Oh, we are fucking technically animals, right? Cool. Alright. This article reviews evidence from ethology, social science, or social psychology, economics, and neuroscience to show that there are fundamental differences in implicit measures of empathy with parallels in development and evolution. Studies in non-human, animal, and younger human populations, infants/children, offer converging evidence that sex differences in empathy have phylogenetic and ontogenetic copy. Development of an individual organism or anatomical or behavioral feature from the earliest stage to maturity. Okay. All right. Fuck me. Okay, that's cool. I'm with you. I'm with you. Where was this? Okay, yeah. Studies in non-human animals and younger human populations / infants, children, offer converging evidence that sex differences in empathy have phylogenetic and ontogenetic roots in biology. They're not merely cultural. And are not merely cultural byproducts driven by socialization. Yeah, that's what I fucking thought. We review how these differences may have arisen in response to males and females, different roles throughout evolution. Examination of the neurobiological underpinnings of empathy reveal important quantitative gender differences in the basic networks involved in affective and cognitive forms of empathy, as well as a qualitative divergence between the sexes in how emotional information is integrated to support decision-making processes. Finally, the study of gender differences in empathy can be improved by designing studies with greater statistical power and considering variables implicit in gender, e.g. sexual preference, or prenatal hormone exposure. Those are big things. So these improvements may also help uncover the nature of neurodevelopmental and psychiatric disorders in which one's sex is more vulnerable to compromise social competence associated with impaired empathy. Is more vulnerable to compromise social competence. I see. Associated with impaired empathy. Yeah. Basically, it's harder for these people to fucking empathize more. Empathy is the ability to understand and share in the internal state of others. Yes, like the boxes I was talking about earlier. It is a complex, multidimensional phenomenon that includes a number of functional processes included in emotional recognition, emotional contagion, and emotional priming. For recent reviews, see these fucking studies here that nobody's gonna fucking look at. As well as the abilities to react to the internal states of others and to distinguish between one's own and others' internal states. Yes. From the perspective of evolutionary and developmental biology, empathy's purposes in both humans and non-human animals can be broadly divided into two categories: promoting pro-social, cooperative behavior, and understanding or predicting the behavior of others. Yeah. So, promoting socializable behavior in which you can function and talk to people, and then predicting that behavior. It's fun shit. Empathy's been studied a fuck ton. I know very basic shit about it, but that's about it. Social psychology has examined the manifestations of empathy within moral reasoning and social behaviors like mimicry. Yep, mimicry is fucking huge for empathy. And economic studies have considered empathy's effects on decision making. Cognitive neuroscience studies of empathy, on the other hand, are mainly divided into two lines of research. One focused on preconscious mechanisms, which underlie / facilitate sharing and mimicry of others' behaviors and internal states. We refer to this as mirroring, which is, yes, this is shit I know. The other line of research is focused on a conscious, deliberative process through which inferences can be made about others' bodily and affective states, beliefs, and intentions, often called mentalizing. These two aspects of empathy can be roughly mapped onto affective or pre-reflective and cognitive, reflective, empathetic predispositions, respectively. Holy fucking shit. Affective empathy is associated with activity in frontoparietal, temporal, and subcortical regions, classically associated with movement, sensation, and emotion, which we just looked at. While neural systems involved in cognitive control and decision-making, such as cingulate, prefrontal, and temporal areas, are often activated during tasks that require cognitive empathy. And that's, fuck, man, that's what learning is it's empathy. But, I mean, where does that, like, desire to just do it? Brain, yeah, hold on, let me just, this is good. This was very fucking useful. Where the hell was it? This one, yes. This is what I'm going to, fucking keep this. Holy shit. Yeah, so the parietal, that's spatial shit. The temporal, that's long-term memory. Processing. What do they fucking say? Frontoparietal. Frontoparietal. It's probably some fucking subsection of that shit. Google it. God, I don't know these words. Oh, Jesus. Okay. Fuck that. That's fine. It's effectively negligible for the study. Alright. While neural systems involved in cognitive control and decision making, such as those fucking areas, are often activated during tasks requiring cognitive empathy. How are these two primary modes of empathizing, cognitive empathy and affective empathy, related? Well, affective empathy involves pre-reflective processes. What do they mean by pre-reflective? That's what I want to know. Okay, so it's just like your gut reaction, like intuition almost. Okay. Okay. All right. Well, affective empathy, which we defined up here, right? Right? What is affective empathy? Yeah, reflective would be like, oh, something is coming at you, that way you jump out of the way or some shit. That's affective, okay. See these fucking words. In cognitive empathy, ability to feel what others are feeling. What's the difference between cognitive and affective empathy? I guess this is more like epistemic in terms of knowledge, and this is more like emotional. Okay, yeah, so cognitive is just like the assessment of their view, basically, or of how they're feeling. Whereas affective is like when you're feeling it. So if someone's sad, then you get sad, you know. Jesus. Fuck. Alright, I guess it's not hard. Furthermore, dude, this is rough, man. Reading this shit about empathy. Yeah, I mean, it does. Alright, how deep do gender differences go in empathy? Okay, cool. Yeah, this is interesting. What are its core biological and neural underpinnings? Holy fuck. See, when you go to college and you start to read like really long fucking smart people papers, you start to realize like, oh my fucking god, I'm just gonna have to expand my mind every time I hear something new. Like if I don't know, I'm going to research it and just like act like I know it from then on out. You know, and it's just like my brain's getting a fucking workout. It's been a hot minute. Effective empathy drives pro-social behavior. Yeah, because I mean, it probably does more, right? Because I mean, then that's if. It's a big if. It's an if-then statement. But it does seem like if you feel or can feel what other people are feeling, like you're gonna be more prone to react well. Maybe not in all cases, but it'll probably make the social behavior just a bit better. In addition, I think if you can just acknowledge it and move on, then you might not make the decision to empathize. You might look down on them or some shit like that. I don't know. That's just my intuition. Sex differences in empathy will also be about. Okay. Lastly, we will review evidence suggesting that the gender differences accessed at behavioral and psychological level are supported by specific neural substrates. Is not limited to the cognitive manifestation of the capacity to take the perspective of another, putting oneself in other's shoes. Instead, empathetic responses are often revealed by immediate responses of the body, suggesting that brain mechanisms meditating such responses are often devoid of cognitive efforts. Yeah, they're involuntary. Emotion, recognition, priming, emotion contagion. Humans, the ability to recognize other people's emotions varies among individuals. Okay, yeah, mirror neurons. It's a multi-layered phenomenon. Several scholars converge in considering an action perception mechanism as central for automatically reproducing others' affective states. Much theoretical discussion has been stimulated by the discovery of mirror neurons of ventral promoter cortex in the inferior parietal lobule of the monkey. Okay, cool. The constructs of empathy is relevant to several disciplines, from psychology and neuroscience to behavior economics and animal behaviors. For years, theories on altruism and kin selection have emphasized the selfish nature of humans and other animals. However, the selfish gene paradigm faced serious challenges to the idea that individuals are complex organisms whose activities ultimately function to increase reproductive success, and to do so through careful calculation of costs and benefit. Jeez. I mean, that's fucking interesting as shit. I don't really know if that tells me much about gender. I mean, but at least I feel like I have a better understanding of the fucking brain now. So, anyway. I mean, jeez, man. Jeez, yeah, I can't listen to something like that and play chess. Holy fucking shit. I mean, this is interesting. I'll probably... Can I just do like a new folder? Let me do here. Let me do a new folder. Brain shit. Brain shit. So I wanna fucking yeah, done. Okay, that's fine. That's cool. 2014 study. Done. Yeah, this is very basic. There's so much like more you can do to get it all done. Anyway, I'm so sorry. This has been. I have no fucking idea how long I've been doing this for. Almost 2 hours. Alrighty. Anyway, I appreciate anybody who showed up. Yeah, no, I like to do research on this kind of shit and figure this crap out, but it's fucking hard. And it's a lot of times it's just easier for me to stream it and then maybe make a video about the subject matter afterwards in a more concise format. That way it's like more informational and less fucking stupid. But yeah, this is probably more in depth than a lot of people would like to get. I mean, most people just want kind of quickly shitting on people, which is cool, but I mean, yeah. Anyway, appreciate you watching, but yeah, I'll see you and have a good one.